Hello everybody, welcome back to High Ground. My name is Tanner, and today we're going to be doing something a little bit different, Fraudwatch. So this is a term that's sort of thrown around here and there, and I think it's pretty self-explanatory. We're watching out for fraudulent players, and as we do this, keep a few things in mind. We're not just looking at the worst 5 players in the league. I could just circle the bottom 5 rated players if I really wanted to and call it a day. We're sort of doing this based on expectations. This is relative to how the player should be performing, or how they performed in the past, or perhaps how other players on their team are performing. I think you'll get the idea once we get into the swing of things. We're going to look at 5 players. Also keep in mind, this is not an indictment on the player overall necessarily. Like, these are all very good players. Perhaps this means that they can't quite hang with the players at the very top, but obviously these are all very good players to be playing at this level at all. Also, this is not an indictment on them as a human being. You know, maybe some of these guys are good guys and maybe some of these guys are not good guys, but that's not really what we're here to decide. We are just looking out for frauds. We're watching out, and this isn't to decide if they are frauds, but this is who to maybe keep an eye on, because we've only played 3 or 4 games in the stage, so especially those are the numbers we're going to be looking at particularly. Maybe there's a little bit more context that I'll speak on for some of the players, but for now, we're mostly going to be focusing on the 3 or 4 online best of ones, in which things can have a lot of variance. So take this with a little bit of grain of salt. This is mostly just for fun. Also, so let me know which 5 players I'm going to select. I have the bottom 20 players here on my screen right now. Bottom 20 out of 40 players, so the bottom half of the league. All 5 of the players on Fraudwatch are going to be in the bottom half here. That's perhaps just happenstance. The higher up they are, the less likely they are to be on Fraudwatch, but still, at any given time, it could be players all in the bottom 10 or players that are even higher up, whatever the case. But for now, they're all appearing on the screen, so let me know who you think it's going to be. Also, later in the video, if you feel like it, if you disagree with any of my selections, feel free to offer alternatives, or just debate why any particular person did not belong on this list. So yeah, we're going to kind of look at the overall stats, and then we'll look at some individual match stats for all of these players. So let's get into it, starting with number 5. All right, at number 5 for Fraudwatch in this iteration, this episode, this week, whatever the case, it's going to be Sweater. So his stats, really, if you look at them, aren't that bad. 0.94 rating, -1 on KD, -1 on entry, and then sort of mediocre everywhere else. A couple of plants, just by chance. But one thing to note here, he is an Ashe and Legion main at the moment. Those are his most played operators on attack and defense. And I think the most important piece of context, let's take a look at this here, change the view. If we look at Oxygen overall, he's by far their lowest rated player. So Oxygen, currently the top team in the league, they're on 9 points, and maybe not, they're not in the lead by a massive amount. Space Station on 8, and some other teams close behind as well. But Fox a 0.13 rating above Sweater. Dream, their hard reach player, is their top rated player. Fox A is sort of more of a support oriented player. Sweater is playing Frag Ops, Ashe, and Legion. He was also their lowest rated player at SI, and a player like Sweater that you brought on to get frags, I definitely think you don't want him as your lowest rated player. It hasn't impeded them too much. Top 3 at SI and currently number 1 in the league, but still, I think you could ask for a little bit more out of Sweater. So let's take a look at some of the particular games, and you'll notice, they're not really that bad of score lines. He goes 9-8 here. He goes positive, which is good. 3-0 on entry. A good showing by all standards. And then the next game, he actually goes 9-8 again. -1 on entry. So just not too terrible. I'm not saying he's an awful player, just that you could maybe hope for a little bit more from him. And then getting into this game, we have a 7-10, 0.75 rating. So this is pretty bad, and it's a little bit questionable, but he's not going 1-10, he's going 7-10. And then finally against Dark Zero. And keep in mind, the only game of these that they lost was against Parabellum, which is this one. He did fine in the game that they lost, so maybe he wasn't the one costing that one specifically. And then, oops, let me go. Where was it? Which, I didn't talk about this one, right? Yeah, so finally we have Sweater going 6-6, so lowest rated player. And again, so not that bad overall, -1. It is what it is. I only have him at number 5, and this is just Fraudwatch. I'm not claiming fraudulence just yet. Maybe we'll get to that down the road, but Sweater is definitely a player to keep your eye on in that regard. So we'll go back to the overall stats, and let's put it back to the normal view as well. All right, so that's number 5. Let's move on to number 4. All right, at number 4, we have Gomez, player on M80. And M80, another team that's doing okay. They're on, I believe, 7 points and A 0.95 rating, -3 on KD, +1 on entry. Really not that terrible overall. The players above him, I think, are even more questionable. I don't think it's reasonable to put him that much higher on this list, but I do think maybe some questions to be raised, and let's check out his games to get a little bit more context on this. So first game was against Parabellum, and Gomez goes 6 and 7, so -1, +1 on entry. It's fine. They beat Parabellum very handily. It's not like a better performance from Gomez was needed at all here, so fine enough there. And then next up they had Dark Zero, and this game they should have won, but they got clutched on by NJR, and Gomez was their worst performing player by far. So a little bit more out of Gomez, and maybe it wouldn't have even come down to a clutch. Maybe it wouldn't have come down to max overtime, and he went 6 and 13. He went 1 and 3 on entry. Pretty bad. This is a pretty dreadful scoreline, and I think a lot more questions are raised regarding Gomez because M80 has these really flashy pickups. They just got Spoit and Iconic, who honestly haven't been spectacular thus far. I think people are hoping to see more from them going forward. And then they also have Kino and Diaz, and Kino has just proven himself to be one of the best hard support players in the world, I think, at this point. And then Diaz looking like one of the better players in the world at the moment. Maybe not top 10, maybe, but I'd probably put him like top 20 range or something. Not sure where I'd put him exactly, but he's been really, really good. Also sort of a support player, just not on the hard support like Kino. So 2 really impressive players, and then 2 other really impressive players that just recently joined the roster. Gomez sort of the odd man out there. Moving on to the next game, we have M80 against Mirage, and Gomez 5 and 5, no entry engagements, fine enough. They won this game pretty handily as well, 7-3. So not much more needed. I think the biggest problem of these 3 games was the Dark Zero performance. And then finally we play against Oxygen, and he actually has a good showing here, but this is a game that they lose. They didn't even walk away with a point. They lost 5-7, and so your good performance was sort of wasted here. And maybe it's not your fault. Maybe you're playing selfishly and these numbers were a bit meaningless. Maybe they were impactless, or maybe your teammates were just shitting the bed and you would have liked to have seen a bit more from them. Whatever the case, Gomez's only really good game was in a game in which they got no points, and so I think I'm going to have him number 4 on Fraudwatch. So let's move on to number 3. At number 3, we have Citizen. So another player with not terrible stats, 0.91 rating, -2 on KD, +1 on entry. He is a player that you expect to get a lot of kills. Throughout his career, he has one of the most impressive stat lines of any player who's ever played the game. But if you put things in context, there's a lot of eyebrows being raised at Citizen because he departed G2 to come to Sonics. This was one of the most exciting changes we've ever seen, exciting roster changes. He changed the regions. He was one of the top players in the world at one point. Maybe the last year or so, he hasn't been as impressive as he was before. But again, one of the all-time top players of this game. And he just hasn't done anything on this roster. They only made it to top 16 at SI, and they are 1 and 2 in the league thus far, and his stats, as you can see, are pretty unimpressive. And what I was going to say before, he left G2 and they replaced him with Benja, and they immediately won SI. So I mean, if there is an indictment on a player, it's got to be that you leave a team and you get replaced and they immediately win SI. Like that's it's not a great look. And then also you join a team that was doing really good before and they're not doing good. But again, SI, maybe that was just a bit of a fluke. They were a brand new team, or at least a brand new 5-stack, I suppose, with Citizen joining. And in the league, we're only 3 games in for Sonics. They have 4 more to play. They could easily still place top 2. They could definitely place top 6, whatever the case. But I mean, you're really questioning why Citizen was imported and bought out from G2 to come over and drop 25 and 27. And so let's take a look at some of their games. We have a game against Space Station first up, and Citizen, he goes 11 and 11, much better than 3 of the other players on the team. They lose in round 15, so a little bit better performance from any of these players, and maybe they could have closed it out in overtime, maybe even regulation. Gricks are popping up and nobody else really putting in much work. Gunner with a nice 4 and 2 on entry, but we're not really here to talk about the match stats. Next game we have Citizen going 8 and 9, 1 and 1 on entry, 3rd rated player. So again, he's outperforming some of his teammates, but still not really putting up great numbers. And then in the other game we have another just -1. So he's yet to go positive. He went right. I got that right. He went even, and then he went -1, and then he went -1. So yeah, he's yet to go even on KD in a game. Only 3 games in, but still, a player like him, you'd expect him to be putting up pretty good numbers in most, if not all, of his games. And so I think, yeah, maybe you could even, because of all the context I mentioned before, put him higher on this list. but well, you'll see my other selections and let me know if Citizen deserves to be number 1 or 2 on this list. So let's go back to the overall list and move on to the next one. At number 2 on Fraudwatch, we have Vertical, and 0.84 rating, -7 on KD, -4 on entry. Just not very good stats overall. He's down here in the bottom 10. He's number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7th from the bottom. So really not great. And I'd give him a little bit more of a pass if all the players on his team were getting smashed. They're sort of a new team. But Beast Coast is currently 2-1, and he's getting massively outperformed by some of his teammates. Let's actually switch over. This is a really important one to consider in the context of his teammates. Yeah, Mr. B and Hat, 2 players brand new to T1, are sort of carrying Beast Coast. Their stats are much better than the other players, especially Vertical, who's the lowest rated player on the team, has the fewest frags, is the most negative, has the worst entry score line, and do cut Vertical a little bit of slack because not only is this a brand new team, but this was supposed to be another player, and then they opted to go with Vertical instead, or perhaps the other player opted to just not play and they just had to pick somebody else and they went with Vertical. Whatever the case, he perhaps in that way deserves the most slack of any player in the league, but it's not like he was retired for any significant amount of time. He was just on Oxygen, and he was okay at SI, but recently his performances, both internationally and regionally, haven't been very good. Not too long ago, he was a monster within the region and just wouldn't put up those kind of numbers internationally, but just a lot of people have been doubting Vertical for a long time, and his numbers this stage haven't really backed him up any. So we'll take a look at his games. We have Oxygen, their first game, and they do lose this game 3-7. Hyper does fine, Hat, Mr. B, and Vertical does, well, he does better than Doc, who went 1-8, but still 6-9, going -3, -1. Not great, but again, you're losing the game. Nobody's like putting up superstar performances. Maybe you get a few more rounds if you do a bit better, but it did seem like they were just getting beat as a team by Dream particularly, but by Oxygen. And then in the next game we have Vertical going 6-7, so another negative, and he's bottom 2 in this game, he's bottom 1 in this game, and then if we go to the last game, he's bottom 2. So he's yet to get above 4th place on his team in any game, and he's pretty massively outperformed by all 3 of these players. 3 very inexperienced players, Doc with a little bit of T1 experience, Hat and Mr. B with none, outdoing Hyper here, but Hyper is sort of in a similar boat compared to Vertical, but Vertical has been playing more recently. He actually played at SI, Hyper played in the SI quals, but didn't make it with Mirage. He didn't play all of stage 3, only played like 2 of the games. Vertical played the whole stage, so Hyper definitely has, you could definitely say he was rustier, but again, Vertical, I think, got the memo that he was going to be joining this team a bit later than Hyper. So yeah, not good numbers coming out from him, and just not great performances out of him in a little while. So number 2 on Fraudwatch there. I'd really like to see him pick it up. He used to be such an incredible player. And yeah, I guess that just leaves us to talk about number 1. Let's switch back here and we'll talk about it. Who is number 1? The final player on the list, number 1 on Fraudwatch, and I really hate to do it, it's Achieved. So yeah, a little bit of low-hanging fruit selecting the lowest rated player in the league, but like his stats are just so awful. Achieved way down here playing some Buck and some Mute. He was such a good player before, and I'm not saying he's completely washed. We're only 3 games in, and do keep in mind he's joining a brand new team, and the rest of the team, they're doing fairly well. We'll look at that. If you looked at the stats before, okay, let me group it by team so I can talk about this adequately. Yeah, NJR's had a monster performance so far. He has almost double the rating of Achieved, and he has a much higher rating than everyone else on the team. But pretty much everyone on the team has a much higher rating than just Achieved. He must have he must have the fewest kills in the league by a decent margin. He's -2 on entry. His KPR, yeah, well, I guess I can just check it. His KPR is like insanely low. His survival rate's not great. Yeah, everything's just not great, and maybe that it's just tough to fit into Dark Zero. They've always been known as a team with a pretty rigid system, maybe less so nowadays with people like Pamzu and Gaveni and whatever. I don't know how their system actually works internally, but they've been thought of as that. And yeah, just Achieved has been having a really rough go of it. And again, like I don't know, Citizen and like pretty much all the other players on this list have maybe a little bit better of a story of why they're on Fraudwatch, but Achieved, it's just like these numbers are so insanely bad. He's only played 3 games, but he went 2-6 in the first one. Everyone else popping off on his team. They smoked Mirage. They won 7-2. So his performance really wasn't that detrimental. And then in the next game, so he went triple negative in the first game. He goes double negative in this game, going 6-12. And they do manage to win this game, but just by the skin of their teeth. Like if Achieved and Pamazoo played a little bit better, maybe they could have got the full 3 points or something. And then in the final game, he goes 3-7. So he hasn't gone better than double negative yet. Yeah, you know, his highest KD was a 0.5 in one of his games. And yeah, just pretty terrible overall. And just based on the fact that he used to, you know, he was a former world champion. He won not the most recent SI, but the one before that. And now he's going double negative or worse in all of his games. Again, only 3 games, but you know, it is Fraudwatch. So watch out. If Achieve doesn't get better, then I mean, yeah, maybe he's just a bona fide fraud. And I hate to say it because, you know, I like him as a player, but yeah, he's going to land as number 1 on this list. And that's going to do it for the list. So if you have your own list, feel free to leave it below. And I don't know, if you enjoyed this video, feel free to comment that below. A like and a subscription obviously are appreciated. And I think that's going to do it for me. I'll catch you guys in the next one.